All right, I'm going to let you all drop your notes in the chat while I do a quick intro for our amazing host today, Hayley Milliman. Milliman, did I say that properly?
Yes, Milliman, yep.
Hayley Milliman. She is the head of education at ProWritingAid. As you guys know, ProWritingAid is one of those rare companies that we love partnering with. We've already partnered with them last year, and we're partnering with them again today to bring you this webinar. And she focuses on building engaging, helpful learning content for millions of users who rely on ProWritingAid to make their writing clear and effective. And that's what she's going to be sharing about today. Hayley has a robust writing portfolio. She's written for dozens of publications on topics related to education, marketing, strategy, history, entrepreneurship, and a whole lot more. She also has published several books related to writing and history, one of which hit the Amazon bestseller list. Woohoo! So welcome, Hayley. Let me turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. I am so happy to be here. Also happy to see some familiar faces in the chat. I see Robert and I were actually just emailing yesterday. So hey, Robert, good to see you. We will be talking today about clarity and about how to use ProWritingAid to make your writing more clear and effective. So I am going to share my screen and dive in. And just before I do, really quickly, I try to keep an eye on the chat as we go. But the best way, if you have a question for me, is to drop it in the Q&A box because those all save. So if the chat's moving really quickly, I can't always keep up with it. But if you have a question that you'd like me to answer about what I'm talking about or about ProWritingAid, please feel free to drop it in the Q&A box and I will get to those throughout the presentation and definitely at the end as well. So I am going to share my screen and we will just, let me get the chat up too. Great, and we will just go ahead and get started. So today we are talking about the 5 principles of creating clarity. And like you just heard, my name is Hayley and I am the head of education at ProWritingAid, which just means that I get to nerd out about words and talking about words with people all day. So today we're going to do 3 things. First, we're going to learn to understand why clarity is the most important goal for all writers. Then we're going to dive deep and discover 5 key principles that will help make your writing more clear. And then finally, we're going to learn how to apply those principles to your writing to make it more effective. Now, when it comes to the application section, we're going to talk about how to apply the principles that we talk about to make your writing more clear. And when we talk about application, I'll be teaching you how to apply these principles both by yourself, but then also with ProWritingAid as well. So you might see up at the top, I have a couple document tabs open. So we will be diving into the ProWritingAid tool. So you can have a peek at how I use it to edit. But that being said, again, all of these principles will be applicable regardless of whether or not you use ProWritingAid. So let's go ahead and dive in. So clarity is an essential part of storytelling because if your work isn't clear, then it's not going to engage readers. As writers, our main job is to get our meaning across clearly and effectively. So if our writing is too complicated or if it's too hard to follow, then we're really not doing our job. We could have the best story, the best characters, the best plot, the best ideas that we're sharing. But if we're not writing clearly, then it doesn't matter how good those ideas are because people are not going to be able to understand them. Unclear writing means that our readers, are going to spend more time trying to figure out what we're saying than actually engaging with our ideas. So again, if our prose isn't clear, if how we set up our sentences isn't clear, then it doesn't matter if we have the best plot in the world, if we have the most unique characters, it won't matter because again, our readers are going to try to figure out what we're trying to say, and they're not going to really engage with those ideas that we spent so much time putting together. Good writing is always going to prioritize clearly communicating ideas over showing off fancy, confusing language. So again, the key piece here is that clarity is about prioritizing clear communication. We always want to go for clear communication, not just showing off our fancy vocabulary or a complicated sentence structure, etc. So before we dive into our principles, I do want to focus first on kind of what clarity is and what clarity isn't. So first, when I'm talking about clarity, I'm talking about 3 things. The first of those things is simple: how easy your writing is to understand. Second is whether or not your sentences are set up in a reader-focused way. And I'd love for all of us to hone in on the second half of that sentence, reader-focused. Now, there's about 100 of us on this webinar right now. Every single one of us has a different group of readers. So clarity is going to change depending on who our readers are. So I have a specific set of readers. Gabriela has a specific set of readers. Stacy from Asheville, North Carolina has a specific set of readers. So all of us have different readers. And so for each of us, clarity is going to be a little bit different because we all have different readers. So we need to make sure that we're taking clarity into account on a sliding scale, depending on who our readers are. And then finally, clarity means adding rich, specific language that increases your reader's understanding. So something I hear all the time working at ProWritingAid and talking about clarity is that people are really worried that if they, prioritize clarity, if they prioritize simple, effective sentences, then they will take all of the personality out of their writing, they'll take all of the nuance out of their writing, and that all of their sentences will sound exactly like everyone else's, which cannot be further from the case. And we'll talk about this as we get into our principles. Clarity is not just about cutting, and paring everything down. Clarity is also about using rich and specific language that will enhance your reader's understanding. But the key to doing that clearly is to make sure you're doing it consciously and effectively and not just kind of having it happen to you. And again, as we get deeper into the presentation, I'll talk more specifically about what I mean by that. But anyway, clarity is those three things: how easy your writing is to understand, whether or not your sentences are set up in a reader-focused way, and whether or not you're using rich, specific language that adds to your reader's understanding. Now, on the other hand, clarity has absolutely nothing to do with how simple or juvenile the ideas in your writing are. So you can have really, really complex, adult, complicated ideas, and your writing can still be very clear. Okay, so it has nothing to do with the content of your ideas. It's not all about writing for a third grader. It's not all about writing content that a third grader can understand. It's about having complicated ideas, but using prose clearly to explain them. So I would actually argue that it's more important to be clear the more complex your ideas are, because as we get into adult material, as we get into complex ideas, we really want to make sure that people are not misinterpreting what we're trying to say. So in some ways, the more complicated what you're talking about is, the more clear and the more effective your prose should be, right? So clarity has nothing to do with the complexity of your ideas. Clarity also has nothing to do with whether or not your prose is engaging, unique, and exciting. Like I just mentioned, your prose can be totally unique to you. It can be engaging, it can use special words, it can be very exciting while still being clear. So again, what we're trying to do here is not to make everybody's writing sound all the same and to talk about really simple, easy to understand concepts. What we are trying to do is make sure that our specific group of readers understand what we're trying to say and are able to easily engage with our ideas without, having to whip out a dictionary or, spending a bunch of time rereading sentences trying to figure out what we're trying to say. So how do we achieve clarity? Clarity starts at the sentence level. So sentences are like mini movies. I want you to think about each sentence as a complete story in itself. It's almost like a mini movie your reader is playing in their head, right? So every sentence can stand by itself. If you, closed your eyes, you could picture what's happening in that sentence, which means it is like a little mini movie. We have to make sure that our sentences are clear in order for our paragraphs and our stories to be clear. There is no way that our paragraphs will be clear if our sentences are not clear. And if our paragraphs aren't clear, there's absolutely no way our stories will be clear. So when we're looking at our writing, we need to make sure that our sentences specifically are clear and are set up in a reader-focused way in order for our stories to be clear as well. So how do we write clear sentences? There are 5 key principles that I think all writers must follow, regardless of genre, to make their writing more clear. The first principle is to make your subjects stars. The second is to reduce glue words. The third is to use powerful verbs. The fourth is to target correct readability. And the fifth is to choose specific and vivid words. Let's go into each of these principles in more depth. And again, as I talk about each of them, I'll talk about what they mean, why to use them and how to apply them. And we'll talk about how to apply them with ProWritingAid, but then also by yourself as well. So let's talk about principle 1, make your subjects stars. So the subjects of your sentences are the main actors and in your text. It's very important to prioritize them and to treat them like the stars that they are. If you've written a sentence in passive voice, on the other hand, that means that your subject is not the star. That means that you've put the object of your sentence before the subject of your sentence. Passive voice takes away the power from your subjects. So here's on this slide, I have an example of a passive voice sentence. The present was opened by Jane. In this sentence, the object, the present, is presented before the subject, Jane, right? So Jane is the subject. She's the one who's doing something, but she comes at the very end of the sentence, right? So it's almost like this image we have here where instead of focusing on Jane, you're focusing on the present first. Now, this example is very, very simple. It's not going to get in the way of anyone's understanding. But the more complicated your sentences are, the more important it is to rely on a sentence structure where your subject is the star. Otherwise, you can create a confusing experience for your readers. Passive voice often negatively affects readers because it's too wordy and it's confusing, again, about who that star is. That being said, passive voice is not grammatically incorrect. And in some instances, it might be okay to use this more complicated sentence structure. I'm not saying, and I'm not arguing at this point, that you need to eliminate all instances of passive voice. What I am saying is that you need to choose consciously when to use passive voice and when to not use passive voice. If it's a bad habit or something that you just kind of have happen in your sentences, then you're probably not using it effectively, and your sentences are becoming too wordy and confusing. If you are kind of consciously choosing to use passive voice, then it can actually add something to your writing. So let's take a look at when to use it. Yeah, so I have one slide ahead of me. Yep. So some of the reasons or places when you want to use passive voice are first when the subject of the sentence is unknown. So for instance, Stonehenge was built around 5,000 years ago. We don't know who built Stonehenge, at least the last time I checked, or the last time I was there, we didn't know who built it. So it's okay to use passive voice in that instance because we don't know who it was. We don't need to attribute or give that star quality to anyone in particular. You can also use passive voice if the subject is irrelevant to understanding the kind of clear meaning of the sentence. So something like the Time and Life building was constructed in 1959 and changed the skyline of New York City. In that instance, it's not really important that the Time and Life building was constructed. What we're really more talking about is how it changed the skyline, right? So in that instance, the subject, the person who's doing the building, we can use kind of that passive construction because really we're focusing on the Time and Life building, right? Like that's the true star of this sentence. We can also do this when we want to hide the subject of the sentence. So like what Gabriela put in the chat, mistakes were made, which is what my cousins and I say together when we play Among Us and accidentally, accidentally kill somebody in our spaceship. But you can make a deliberate choice to say something like mistakes are made, or if you're writing a crime novel or something mysterious, where in this example, a suspicious package had been left on a doorstep, right? Like in this instance, Mary doesn't know who had left the suspicious package, so it's not important to offer that attribution, right? So the key is to make sure you are consciously choosing when it makes sense to use passive voice. So if your instance falls in one of these three categories, or another category that I haven't identified here, but again, you're consciously choosing it as adding something to your text, then it's totally okay to have passive voice. If, however, you kind of have passive voice as a bad habit, if it doesn't really fall into one of these buckets, and if you're trying to make your sentences more simple and clear and less wordy, then it's probably time to eliminate passive voice. Now, fortunately, eliminating passive voice is easy. So to fix the sentence that we had before, the present was opened by Jane, we could just swap that sentence around to say Jane opens the present. So we even have a little shift of our image here with Jane now becoming the focus instead of the present, because again, now she is the star of the sentence. So how to fix this yourself is first to look for instances of the word by, So like the example we had, the present was opened by Jane. Usually the word by or a sentence that could have the word by and doesn't is a good indication that you've used the passive voice. You can also look for like to be plus verb constructions, like was opened. That's kind of a good instance or a good indication that there might be another instance of passive voice there. And then when you found those, simply switch the subject so that it comes first. So instead of the present was opened by Jane, put who or what is doing the action at the beginning. So Jane is opening the present, so she comes at the beginning. Very simple. Now, you can also do this with ProWritingAid. So let me pull up my ProWritingAid documents list. And let's see if we can find an example of passive voice. So we have one right here. So we have an example of passive voice. It was decided by us. And this is, again, a perfect example of passive voice. You can find that it has the word by. We have the to be plus verb construction. So you could find this on your own. But again, ProWritingAid makes it super simple to find instances of passive voice just like this, to highlight over them, and then either to correct it yourself, depending on the context of the correction, or to offer a correction itself. So we'll see another one down here with was followed. In this instance, the sentence construction will take a little bit more work to rewrite. So there isn't a particular suggestion for how to rewrite it, because you're going to need to kind of shift the sentence around. But it does highlight these instances of passive voice that you can remove or replace to make your writing more effective. Now, I wanted to highlight this one down here, which is a little bit more complicated, because this is one of the great things about ProWritingAid, is that it gives you a lot of information about your writing, and sometimes it'll offer suggestions for how to fix it, but not always. And I think that not always is really important, because we don't want all of our writing to sound the same, right? So we talked earlier about how clarity is about is not about just having this kind of rote, very, simple and kind of like monolithic sentence structure. Clarity is about figuring out what makes sense for your readers. So at different points, as you're using ProWritingAid, you might see suggestions if they are simple, but you also might see instances like this, where it's like, hey, you know what, this particular instance might get in the way of your readers' understanding. But that being said, we're going to give the kind of ownership of correcting this to you, because as the writer, we want you to retain your sentence's meaning and your sentence's voice. So that is how you can fix passive voice in ProWritingAid. A couple other quick fun things about these passive voice corrections while I'm here. So if you hover over the passive voice, or any correction rather, you'll see kind of a recommendation for the correction. You'll also see this little eye up here in the top that you can see is kind of blinking. If I click that, it will open up an article about the correction specifically, as well as a little video that you can watch to see, why we're making that suggestion. So I'm going to cover 5 different kind of categories of suggestions that we have on this presentation, but there are thousands and thousands and thousands that ProWritingAid has. So if you're ever like looking at a correction and you're not exactly sure why that correction is there, again, pop open the suggestion, hit that little eye, and you'll get an article that explains why the correction is suggested, and then you can choose to apply it or not. Which brings me to other couple cool features. So you can always click to disable a rule, so that disables it for your entire document, or you can just ignore a specific suggestion within your writing if you don't want to apply it. So if you've decided that this passive voice suggestion makes sense based on the categories we talked about, simply hit ignore and it'll go away. Okay, let's dive back in. We'll keep talking about ProWritingAid as we go, but let's dive back into our principles of clarity. This is one of my favorites. So our second principle, of clarity is to reduce glue words. So sentences have 2 types of words. This is how we talk about it at ProWritingAid. We talk about all sentences as having 2 types of words: working words and glue words. Your goal as a writer will always be to prioritize your working words over your glue words. Hayley, what are working words? Let's get into it. So working words are words that contain a sentence's most essential information. Think your nouns, your verbs, your adjectives, words that you cannot change or the meaning of the sentence will change. So if I said Hayley delivered a webinar and changed Hayley to Gabriela, the meaning of the sentence would change. If I said Hayley slept through a webinar instead of Hayley delivered a webinar, the meaning of the sentence would change. If I said Hayley delivered a package instead of Hayley delivered a webinar, again, the meaning of the sentence would change. So all of those words that I was switching in and out, again, my nouns, my verbs, my adjectives, those are working words. Can't change them or the sentence will change. Now, those are not the only type of words in a sentence. Sentences also have glue words. Glue words are words that make the essential pieces of the sentence stick together. They're necessary to make the sentence make sense, but you can reduce, remove, or replace them, and the meaning of the sentence won't really change. So if I switched, Hayley delivered a webinar to Hayley delivered the webinar, switching a for the changes it a hair, but not too much, right? So those are the kind of glue words where you can change them, you can reduce them, you can reorder your sentence a little bit. And again, the kind of main meaning of the sentence will stay the same. So glue words tend to be words like conjunctions, articles, that prepositions, that type of thing, where again, you might be able to reduce, remove, or replace them to make your sentence more clear. The more glue words you have, the stickier your sentence becomes. And a sticky sentence is a sentence that is overly wordy and confusing for readers. It's going to get them kind of stuck in the structure of the sentence rather than focusing on the idea. So let's take a look at an example because I think that's the easiest way to share it. So in this sentence, we have Dave walked over into the backyard of the school in order to see if there was a new bicycle that he could use in his class. Now, I want you to tell me in the chat. I know the question here is wrong. The question should be, what are the working words, not what are the glue words? So tell me in the chat, what are the working words? Again, working words are the words that carry the sentence's meaning, that have all of the key information, your nouns, verbs, adjectives. Tell me in the chat, what are some of the working words in this sentence? I'll give you a couple seconds to write those in. So we've got Dave, walked, see, and use from Stacy. Backyard, school, bicycle, class. Walked, see, use, totally. Yeah, so it seems like we've got a couple people who all, or a bunch of people rather, who all have the same exact working words that I had. And again, sorry, that question was incorrect. It should have been, what are the working words? So the working words in the sentence are Dave walked, backyard, school, new bicycle, and class. If I switched any of these working words, the meaning of the sentence would change. So for instance, if I said switched Dave for Nicholas, the meaning of the sentence would change. If I switched walked to dashed, the meaning of the sentence would change. If I switched school to fire department, sentence would change. Bicycle to roller skates, sentence would change. Class to family reunion, the meaning of the sentence would change. Again, these are kind of the key words that are necessary for the sentence. Now, somebody in the chat asked why use is not a working word in this instance, and it's because you'll kind of see how I rewrote this in a second. I don't want to give it away, but one of the things here is that kind of whole phrase that he could use in class is a little overly wordy and complicated, and it could just be replaced by like the word for, like a new bicycle for class, right? That would say the same exact thing and it wouldn't change the meaning of the sentence extensively. So that's why in this instance, again, use is not a particular working word. Now, in a different context, use could be a working word, but in this instance, it's not. So adverbs tend to be, I would say they tend to be working words. These are definitions that are kind of dependent on the context of the sentence itself, just like we had for use here. So when you're looking at a sentence like this and looking at a sticky sentence, your goal is to figure out like what the working words are and what the glue words are within the context of the sentence itself, especially when you're going to rewrite it. Now, there isn't like a definite list of glue words out there. So for instance, like you could say, so we have like a list of glue words that are around the like 200 or so kind of most common words in the sentence. But most common words in sticky sentences. But that being said, some words, it's a sliding scale and it does depend on the sentence itself. And so somebody in the chat said that you could use or dismantle ride the sentence meaning would change. Totally, you totally could. But again, we're thinking about it within the context of the phrase at that point. And again, like I said, sticky glue words and working words are a sliding scale that's totally dependent on the section itself. So the glue words in this instance would be the other words that are not highlighted. So if you have a sentence like this one, which is super wordy, which has a lot of different words in it, how do we fix it? There isn't one specific way to fix a sticky sentence, which is both good and bad news. So it's good news because, again, you kind of retain your author's voice and you can go in and decide how you want to fix it and decide what the meaning is yourself, right? So when we're looking at sticky sentences, what we want to think about is what are we really trying to communicate? So for instance, somebody again in the chat had said, there's a world in which use is a working word because that's kind of like a clear, it's kind of clear about like what the author's intent is there. And so I would say that, in an instance where it's really important that he is using it for class versus dismantling it or whatever the other suggestions were, you could decide to keep the word use in there. However, if the fact that he's using it for class is less important than the fact that he's just checking the backyard for that bicycle, you can decide to remove that section or replace it with something else. So the key here is to find sentences where you have too many of these articles, prepositions, conjunctions, etc., too many words and phrases that make the sentence too kind of clunky, too sticky for readers to get through easily, and then to reduce that in a way that makes sense for your meaning as the writer. Ultimately, you are the one who knows what you're trying to communicate with that sentence, so you have to try to fix it yourself. So let's try to do that because I want us to see how many different ways we could fix that sentence. So go ahead and in the chat, put how you would fix this sentence. Remember, you can reduce the use of glue words by simply removing them. You can replace them. You can rephrase certain things. For instance, you could switch Dave walked over into to Dave walked to the backyard of the school. You could switch Dave walked over into the backyard of the school to Dave walked to the school's backyard. Totally up to you. There's many different ways that you can fix this sentence, but the job here is to reduce, remove, or replace some of those extra words that are not those key working words we identified. So I'll give you a couple minutes. Go ahead and drop in the chat how you would fix this sticky sentence. And then I'll share what I came up with. So Laura said, Dave walked into the backyard to look for a new bicycle to use in class. Much clearer, much more simple. Dave entered the school's backyard to get a new bicycle for class. Dave walked into the backyard to check if there was a new bicycle for class. Nice. Dave searched the school's backyard for a new bicycle to support his class presentation. I love that that example that Scott has, because that's a perfect example of, again, using your intent as an author to inform how you fix this sticky sentence, right? So there is not one specific way to fix it. And just like we were talking about, use might be a working word depending on what you're trying to say. So with all of these, again, your intent, the ideas you're trying to communicate and who your readers are totally going to inform how you fix these things. So it's not just a matter of knowing, what the rule is, but it's knowing how the rule applies to your context. That's perfect. So we've got tons of different examples. And what's also really great about seeing all of these is that we've all fixed them in kind of different ways, which is great. So everybody has a slightly different option, and all of the options that I'm seeing in the chat are much more effective than this clunky, wordy sentence, right? So there are many different ways to fix a sticky sentence. There is not one specific right way. Your job is to identify the sticky sentences, figure out what you are trying to say, and then clearly and effectively make it more simpler and to the point. So here's the new version that I came up with, which is Dave checked the school's backyard for a new bicycle to use in class. And again, this is not any better or worse than anyone else's. Again, all of the sentences that we just rewrote have made an improvement because they're easier and more effective than that long, wordy sentence we had before. So how do you do this when you are writing yourself? So if you're fixing sticky sentences yourselves, there's a few things to look for. First, I would look for overly long sentences. In most instances, I would say something that's over 18 words is probably too long. Depending on your genre, that might be a little bit smaller. Obviously, if you're writing for children, your range is going to shift a little bit. But overall, if you're writing for adults, anything over 18 words long is a flag that it's probably sticky. Once you have found those sentences that are too long, I want you to look for your glue words. So the easy way to look for glue words is to find your prepositions, conjunctions, and articles in that sentence. But you could also do an exercise just like we did, where you yourself are underlining, what are my working words? So you can you could also like approach it from the working words perspective and say, I'm not going to look at the glue words. I'm going to focus on my working words and fix that way. But again, identify something that's overly long. Identify the places where there are glue words, or alternatively what your working words are, and then rewrite that sentence reducing the glue words. It's important to remember, like we talked about, there's not one way to fix a sticky sentence. Just as we had kind of dozens of different ways to fix it, there are dozens of different ways you can fix any of your sticky sentences. And Gabriela has something to add really quickly, and then I'll show you how ProWritingAid can help this.
Hey folks, so I wanted to sort of chime in on the rule of thumb that Hayley mentioned about the 18 words. My general rule of thumb is a little bit different, but same basic idea. I think of every sentence as having a certain number of little idea nuggets in them. So when we had the, Dave walked, that's one idea. Into the school is another idea. To the backyard would be a different idea. Those are all little nuggets of ideas. There's actual research that shows that when people have to remember more than 3 concepts, like 3 things in a string of ideas, they start to forget what's at the beginning. And there's actual data. Psychology researchers have done things where they have people remember strings of numbers, et cetera, et cetera. This is why when we try to memorize phone numbers, we clump the numbers together. We don't go each individual digit, we think chunks of numbers at a time. So the rule of thumb here is if you're finding that the 18-word rule of thumb isn't quite working for you, ask yourself, what are the chunks of ideas in a sentence? If you've got more than 3 chunks of ideas in your sentence, chances are you got a lot of glue words in there. You can either pare it down within the one sentence, or you could split it up into more than one sentence if there are enough ideas to warrant that. So I'll hand it back to Hayley now.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. That's such a great point. And I think a couple things from what you said are so important. One is that the chunks of ideas are probably going to be joined by words like prepositions or conjunctions, right? So like a preposition is probably introducing a new chunk of an idea, or a conjunction might be as well. Conjunctions are almost in many instances indicating places where sentences can be split up as well. So that's such a great way of thinking through, again, what are the kind of key ideas that I'm trying to communicate in this sentence, and then how can I split it up effectively as well. So totally great. And then your point as well about the splitting up of a sentence into 2 ideas is also really important, because glue words are totally dependent on like the percentage of glue words that's okay within a sentence depends on how long that sentence is, right? So so every sentence is kind of judged against itself for its kind of percentage of glue words. So let's talk about how to find that in ProWritingAid. So ProWritingAid has what we call the sticky sentences reports, which is over here. And that sticky sentences report goes in and it identifies the problematic sentences in your writing, so you don't need to do it. So the report is broken down into sticky and semi-sticky sentences. Now at ProWritingAid, we say that anything around 40% glue words, 60% working words is typically in the okay range for stickiness. That being said, if something is, at 45% stickiness, or if something is at like 47, it might not be something that you have to pay attention to, which is why we break it into sticky and semi-sticky. So your kind of overall document target is to have 40% stickiness and 60% working words. And then you can zoom into specific sticky sentences, which are sentences that are 60% or higher. And then semi-sticky are in that like 40 to 60 neighborhood, where you might decide to change them, or you might decide that it's okay. Now, what makes ProWritingAid great is when you hover over a particular sentence, it will tell you what the glue words are in that sentence, so you know what what words you can reduce, remove, or replace to make your sentence more clear. Now, again, you'll notice that with this particular suggestion, it does not tell you how to rewrite the sentence, because as we just saw, there is not one specific way to do it. There's many ways to do it. So you will have to decide how to rewrite the sentence based on what your meaning is. But again, it's really helpful for you to be able to see exactly which your problematic sentences are, what the glue words are in that sentence, so that you can make those changes yourself. Okay, let's go back into our third principle rather. Okay. So our third principle of creating clarity is to use powerful verbs. Let me just bring my notes, or sorry, my chat back over here so I can see it. Okay. Our third principle of clarity is to reduce hidden verbs. So verbs are the engines in our writing. They are the words that have the most power, the words that we should really be using to kind of move what we're trying to say forward. Many writers, particularly novice writers, lean on weak or hidden verbs, which take some of the power away from what they're trying to say, which again kind of deprioritizes their ideas and makes them less powerful. So hidden verbs, also known as nominalizations, are one of the common ways of doing this. So saying something like, "we will make an announcement of the winner on Friday," is a way where you are hiding the kind of powerful verb in here, announce, behind a weaker phrase like make an announcement. Another common way of using weak verbs is to do something like using an adjective like, or excuse me, an adverb like very, or adding an adverb in place of what a strong verb like that could be more effective without that adverbial phrase. So your goal as a writer is to let verbs power your writing and drive your writing forward. You want to first remove nominalizations. So in that previous sentence where we had, "we will make an announcement of the winner on Friday," again, that sentence is taking the power away from the verb because it's hiding it in this confusing phrase. A more powerful way to say it is, "we will announce the winner on Friday." That is giving the meaning to your specific verb. You could also say, instead of a weak verb like "I ran quickly," pick verbs that say what you mean. So "I dashed towards the bus" is a more powerful verb than "ran quickly." Again, when we're using strong verbs like this, our goal is to make sure that we are finding verbs that say exactly what we mean and give power to and energy to our sentences rather than taking that away. Now, these are very hard to find. One of the ways that you can find weak verbs is typically by looking for adverbs like very or words that end in ly. If you're trying to find nominalizations, you can look for those by looking for words that end in things like sion, so like make a decision. That's a good indication if it ends in like sion, tion, or something like that you've used a nominalization. But again, ProWritingAid makes it super simple to go through this. And I'm going to speed through some of these feature shows so that we can go towards the Q&A and talk a little bit more about specific areas of ProWritingAid that can help. But ProWritingAid's style report makes it really easy to find places where you have used examples of hidden verbs. So for instance, saying "I managed to allude" instead of "I alluded to," right? You're taking away the power from that verb by adding this kind of longer, unclear verb phrase. ProWritingAid can also help you find adverbs. So we have one here that you can either remove, or depending on the suggestion itself, it might, here, instead of saying "the very dark night," maybe you want to talk about how it was a gloomy night or a dreary night. Again, giving, in this instance, is an adjective, but it will also find adverbs that are affecting verbs and give you suggestions for, again, how to make them more powerful and more effective in your writing. So let's go on to our fourth principle, which is to target the correct readability. So on average, Audiences prefer works that are easier to read. If you're writing mass market fiction, you're typically going to be writing at around a 7th grade US reading level, which means that you're using prose that 12 to 13-year-olds could understand. Again, that has nothing to do with the ideas. It has specifically to do with how you're setting up your sentence structures. And it's important to make sure that you remember that audiences want to engage with your ideas. They don't want to be wrestling with your prose, figuring out what your sentences are saying, and trying to figure out, again, what your word choice is, what a specific word you're using means. The goal is to engage with ideas, not to show off word choice. Audiences want works that are easy to read, so again, they can engage with those ideas, not to be wrestling with your prose. So what does it mean to have easy to read prose? First, again, it means that ideas are the stars. So a readable work is a work that lets ideas shine, so audiences don't have to worry about word choice, sentence structure, etc. Readable work also means that you've chosen words carefully. Now, when you're writing a readable work, you don't have to forego all interesting or all domain-specific words. Just be choosy. And when I talk about this, I always talk about writing assessments for kids, because when you're writing assessments for kids, it's, sometimes you'll have to use complicated words. When you use complicated words, you just need to make sure that all the words around that are easier so the kids don't get tripped up. So it's the same thing when you're writing for adults. You don't have to remove all interesting or domain-specific vocabulary from your writing. Just be careful about which words you choose. Not every word should be like a show-stopping dictionary type word. Some words can be, but use them carefully. You also, when you're thinking about readability, need to think about who your audience is. Every audience is different, and consider yours when targeting readability. So if you're writing for a college level audience, or an academic paper for a doctoral group of people, your readability is going to be different, and the readability you target will be different than if you're working with, again, mass market fiction or something like that. It all depends on who you are writing for. That's going to create the kind of target area for readability for yourself. Again, readability does not mean that your prose is boring. So just like I said previously, you can use unique words and sentence structures. Just do it consciously. Don't, again, just show off your vocabulary just for the sake of it. Make sure if you're adding complicated words in there, you're doing it for a purpose. You also, readability also has nothing to do with whether or not your writing is dumbed down. A lot of times writers get really nervous if I say things like, you should be writing at a 7th grade reading level. Again, it has nothing to do with the content of the ideas. It has all to do with the words that you've chosen and the way you've set up your sentences. And again, complicated ideas deserve clear language so that your readers engage with those ideas and not with how you set them up. So how do you figure this out? You need to look up a readability score. So a readability score is a score that predicts who will be able to read your writing. There are many types of readability scores to choose from. There are many different formulas for calculating this, but all of them basically predict, again, what level of reader would be able to understand your writing. They present that information in a little bit different of a way, but again, they're all kind of doing the same thing. There are tons of free readability calculators out there online. This is not something, unfortunately, that you can really do yourself, but there are just dozens and dozens of free readability scores out there online where you can input your text, again, get the score from them on what level of reader would be able to understand your text, and then you can see if that matches up with who your audience is. So if you do that and you run your writing through a readability calculator and you find that your score is too high, here are a few things that you can do. First, you want to use an easier vocabulary. So that's a clear and specific way to make the readability score go down, is to just pick easier words. You could also shorten your sentences. So this is one of the things that Gabriela was talking about with, there's audiences can only hold a couple idea nuggets in their head at one time. If your sentences are too long, there are too many idea nuggets in there. So shorter sentences almost always improve readability. You can also remove jargon or domain-specific language that readers will not understand, and use active voice, because passive voice sentence structures tend to make your writing more unclear. So again, if you have a readability score that's too high, the goal is to reduce or remove these examples here, and then your readability score will go down. It's not just about one of these different things. You'll probably have to do more than one to make your work more readable, but going through all of these different suggestions will help make it more effective for your particular audience. Now, within ProWritingAid, we have a number of different features that can help you with this. So first of all, we have, let me collapse this toolbar up here. So first of all, up here on the left-hand side, we have a way that you can shift your document type. Now, like I mentioned, readability is a sliding scale, and it'll depend on who you're writing for and what you're writing. So we let you switch between genre as well as between type of document so that you can have an appropriate readability score for your particular set of readers. So if I switch this to children's, for instance, it's going to say that my readability grade, it's going to shift my readability calculator very differently than if I switched this to academic essay. You'll see that my readability grade has shifted a little bit. And again, it's going to depend basically on what your document type is and who is specifically looking for that document. Now, within the ProWritingAid tool itself, you can find examples of places where you can improve readability either by doing passive voice. You can do it by, let's see if we had an example. For instance, here, result in, if you're using multiple phrases, that's an example of places where you can improve readability. So you can see examples of that throughout your style and real-time reports. You can also come in and get your readability report specifically, which breaks it down paragraph by paragraph. So you'll see over here that you get an overall document score, as well as a breakdown of which particular paragraphs are difficult to read or easy to read. So you can zoom in, get how that paragraph stacks up, and then spend your time fixing that if you need to. So many different ways to affect your readability with ProWritingAid. Okay, and let's go into our final principle. So our final principle is to choose specific words. Now, we've talked a lot about how to cut things, how to simplify things throughout this principle, but here I want to talk about kind of adding and making sure that your word choice is conscious and specific. So clarity, again, is not just about simple sentence structures. Clarity is also about delivering the specificity your readers need to understand what you're trying to say. So for instance, if you're using words like good or tall or some or something like that, those words tend to lack the specificity readers need to make that movie we were talking about be accurate. So for instance, I am really short, so everyone is tall for me. So when authors use words like, he was tall, I'm like, oh, that could be anything. Whereas if someone's really tall, somebody being tall to them might mean something totally different. So our goal is to always make sure that we are using the most specific words so that that movie our readers are playing in their head is as accurate as possible. So here's an example of a vague sentence. Kate made some improvements to her cabin and now it's worth more. If I were to ask every person on this webinar to draw a picture of Kate making improvements to her cabin, we'd probably all draw 100 different things about, of different ways that people can improve their cabin, right? So there's so many different ways that you can improve your cabin and make changes, right? Worth more also can be very, very different depending on what you do, right? So many different ways to make improvements. It's too vague because we have so many options open for interpretation. Here's a much better example of how to be specific. Kate replaced the bathroom suite, repainted the living room, laid hardwood floors in her cabin, increasing its value by 10%. This sentence is much more specific. It goes into detail about exactly what Kate did, exactly how the value increased, so that if we were to draw this or paint the movie in our head, we would likely be much more aligned than we were previously when the sentence was too vague. The point of this is that clarity does not always equal brevity. So it's not always about saying something in the shortest way. It's about being simple and clear, but also making sure that the words you choose to be simple and clear are as effective and specific as for what you're trying to say as possible. Again, a good way to think about that is that question about working and glue words, right? If we look at this sentence, there are not very many glue words in this sentence because most of the ideas in this sentence, most of the words in the sentence, you couldn't change them without changing the meaning of the sentence. For instance, I couldn't change living room to kitchen, or the sentence's meaning would change. I couldn't change Kate to someone else, etc. So a good question is, are the words that I'm choosing working words that I could not change without changing the meaning of the sentence? So one way to do this is to ask yourself, is the reader or is the movie or reader playing in their head about the sentence accurate to what I'm trying to show? Obviously, everything is going to be open to interpretation, but that being said, overall, we want to make sure that that reader or that movie that our reader is playing is as effective, as accurate as it can possibly be. Now, of course, the ProWritingAid can also help you with this. We have a number of different ways. So the real-time report that I've shared several different times can help you find these vague words, but also our diction report specifically, you can come into here and find lists of vague and abstract words in your writing and then zoom into those to find more effective replacements for those words. You can also use our thesaurus check. So if you have a vague word in your writing, and then you've used it to, you can't figure out what to use instead, the thesaurus check might help you come in and find a different example of a different word that could replace that. So lots of different options to make your writing more specific. Okay, so today we talked about a lot of different things. And before we get into questions, just to recap, we talked about, first of all, why clarity is the most important goal for all writers. We also talked about 5 key principles to make your writing more clear. And then we also talked about how to apply those principles to your writing to make it more effective, both on your own and with ProWritingAid. And with that being said, I am going to open it up for questions. Before I do that, I do want to say that we have a partnership going on, and we are offering 50% off our lifetime license, which is a huge deal. It's something that we really, I truly cannot remember the last time we offered 50% off lifetime licenses. So I'm going to drop the link in the chat if you are interested in checking out ProWritingAid. This is truly a once in a lifetime deal. I literally can't even remember the last time we offered 50% off. And it'll give you 50% off lifetime, which is good for the lifetime of your lifetime, as well as access to all of our integrations, access to all of our reports, and use on many devices. So that being said, let me dive into questions. I saw a couple come through the chat. Please make sure that you drop those in the Q&A so I don't lose them. But I will address the 2 that came into the chat first. So someone asked, what do we offer that's not in Grammarly? So we have far more reports than Grammarly does. So you'll see up here at the top, we have over 20 different reports that focus on everything from style and grammar and punctuation, etc., to everything from, again, sticky sentences, readability, structure, echoes, repeats, all of this type of things. And then again, dozens more that I haven't even gone into. So you can totally, we have just so many more than Grammarly does in terms of reports. I think our prioritization on education is also really important. So for every one of our suggestions, like I mentioned, we have these in-tool articles and videos that help you really understand your writing and understand why we're making a suggestion. Many of those articles also have quizzes attached, so you can you test yourself on that. And then I think another huge differentiator is our community. We're really about supporting writers at all versions of their writing process. As someone in the chat actually just sent to the panelists, so I don't think everyone can see it, but they said we have really good workshops. So thank you, Clark. And yeah, I think like our support of the writing community is really a huge deal. We do a really great job of like providing a lot of free content to writers. And yes, Stacy asked if we have a basic proofing function. Yes, we do. So our real-time checker, which is over here. Oops, sorry, I clicked the wrong thing. Our real-time checker gives you grammar, spelling, etc. And then you can also find those in the grammar report if you just want to run that. So Gabriela, if you want to come on and go through the Q&A, I can dive into each of them.
Sure. Why don't we take the questions as they came in? So
Great. Yep.
We have, on average in a chapter, what should be the ratio of active versus passive voice? I have feelings on this, but I want to hear yours.
Yeah, no, I'm curious to hear your feelings. One of the ways that ProWritingAid does that is by suggesting a different passive voice ratio depending on your document type, because I do think it's dependent on type of chapter. For instance, academic writing tends to have like a higher passive voice ratio because there are more instances of those, it doesn't matter who created this thing, or we don't know who created it. Again, like you were saying in the chat, Gabriela, academic writing can be a little bit wordy and more complicated, and it tends to like be more forgiving of those types of things than fiction writing is. So it is kind of dependent on context, which is why the ability to select your document type helps. But yeah, do you have thoughts on what the appropriate ratio is?
I would say my feeling is, unless you have an actual reason for using the passive voice, like unless you're doing it with a calculated purpose, regardless of what you're writing, I think that you can actually use active voice for just about everything. And like, even with academic writing and things like that, like just because you're writing something where all the other people are writing with passive voice doesn't mean it gives you a free pass. No. I believe that we word nerds, like we strive for excellence regardless of our field. So as a true word nerd, I want to encourage folks to use active voice unless you are purposefully choosing the passive voice, in which case you should have a, muhaha kind of reason for wanting to hide that subject.
I completely agree. Yeah, that's what my high school English teacher always said. Just like never use passive voice. He would mark it up in all of our papers all the time.
So, all right, our next question is about showing and telling. Showing and not telling is an effective writing tool. How often should you use it? And I think sort of the corollary to that is, what if you just have to tell something? Like, what if that is required in your story? Yeah,
that's a great question. And I think this similarly to passive voice, right? Telling is not wrong, right? So they're just the same way passive voice is not grammatically incorrect. So there are instances where you might decide, I need to just tell something because I need to move this story forward. Like I'm in a place where the pacing, it needs to be faster, where I am just like going between one thing to another. And you decide to kind of cut some of that showing description and that type of thing. So some of that might be context dependent. Again, I think what you honed in on, Gabriela, with passive voice about like having a reason, that's my biggest goal for all writers, is just to have a reason. And I think that's one of the reasons why ProWritingAid is so great, is because a lot of times we just do things without realizing that we do them. And when ProWritingAid comes in and says, hey, Hayley, you have 15 emotion tells. So 15 times you've told in this section, like, did you mean to? Then you can be like, yeah, you know what? I did mean to here. I meant to because I'm trying to keep up the pace, because I'm trying, for whatever reason you have. I'm making a stylistic choice, whatever it is. You can say, I consciously meant to tell here, rather than just having it happen to you. And I think a lot of times as writers, things just kind of like happen to us, particularly in the service of ideas. Like we're so committed to getting these ideas out there and finishing whatever we're working on, that we don't always think through, like, am I doing this in terms of my words and sentences in the best and most effective way? Or am I just trying to get this out so that I've gotten it out? So again, something like ProWritingAid's emotion tells here, first of all, it gives you kind of a range for where you should be for your document type, but then it also highlights places where you've done that, so you can go in and, again, did I do it? did I mean to tell here, or did I mean to show here? Would it really be beneficial in this section to give more kind of description and that type of thing?
From a storytelling perspective, assuming that most folks on this webinar are either writing fiction or memoir that has a story arc, what I usually recommend is, when you need to do a logistical jump in your story, that's usually where telling helps you. So let's say you're writing a story and your character has to ride the subway. You don't need to describe every crack in the sidewalk, every little moment, and like every dog that they, see on their way to the subway before they get on the subway, before whatever else happens. But if it happens to be a day where something really important happens on that subway ride, then maybe you do want to paint the picture and give us a sense of what's happening and to build up for it. So both telling and showing are in service of the story. You want to make sure that you're using the right one for the right moment in your story.
Exactly. Yep, totally.
So our next question actually also ties to like showing and telling, and this is in terms of sentence length, is about pacing. So we had talked about, keeping our sentences short and whatnot, like having the idea nuggets, et cetera, et cetera. That said, what if you want to have this beautiful woven flowy sentence because it's part of what creates the mood for the story. What then?
Yeah. Again, I think you hit the nail on the head where if you're doing it, again, consciously, if you're trying to build up a description, set the mood, etc., probably fine to have slow pacing. And when you're doing slow pacing, typically longer sentences or a little bit more detailed. If you're in the middle of a battle scene and a lot of stuff is happening, you might decide to go with shorter sentences to just kind of keep things clear. I think it's also important to think about, what is my reader taking away from this passage? So if it's a part where a lot of action is happening and they're having to kind of keep track of a lot of different characters doing different things, it might be easier to do that with shorter sentences. Whereas again, if you're in a section where you are setting a mood, where it's more about the feeling that the reader is experiencing than the specifics of kind of what's happening, that might be a time where you decide to have slower pacing, longer sentences, again, setting that kind of descriptive mood. Again, ProWritingAid can.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I was just going to say ProWritingAid can help with that as well. Again, I want you all to think about the fact that this is not telling you what's wrong or what's right in your writing. It's telling you where you have areas that you might want to pay more attention to. So the pacing check can tell you, you can see either here in your goals, or you can see by running our particular pacing, our pacing check specifically, where are areas where you have concentrations of slow pacing. And again, think, did I mean to do this here, or did this just kind of happen here? And I actually should move the story forward a bit more.
One other thing I want to add too, with regard to pacing and sentence length, is that one of the things that is sort of it seems contradictory, but sometimes shorter sentences actually can slow the pacing down, and longer.
Yeah, they're exhausting.
And it depends on how you structure the sentence and what's happening in the story. So for instance, if you have this moment where you want to create suspense, it could actually help you to stretch that moment out with a really long sentence to keep the reader in that feeling of So the idea, I think, Hayley hit the nail on the head. It's about seeing what you're doing naturally and then making an educated choice when you're revising.
Yep, totally.
So we had some questions about the functioning of it, things like what the underlines mean.
Yep. So the underlines, the underlines are totally different for each report. So there's not an inherent red is bad, green is good, or anything like that. It'll just depend on what the specifics for that report are. So for instance, within here, grammar and spelling errors within the real time are underlined in blue, and then style is underlined in yellow. But if I go to a different report, it's all just kind of categorized based on what the category for that specific report is. So if you went into repeats, there would be different highlights, and it would just kind of be okay, these are the places where you've highlighted this one word phrase or this larger word phrase and that type of thing. So it all just kind of depends on the report specifically. But usually it's a way of grouping a period or a group of errors, or not errors, or suggestions too.
In terms of integrations, does it integrate Scrivener with Word? What are the?
Yes, it does integrate with Scrivener. It integrates with Word as well. We have a bunch of different integrations, which I think is another kind of key differentiator of our software. So first, what I'm in right now is the web editor. So you can always use the web editor, which is a place to come, and you can either write in it or you can upload or paste in your documents. We have a desktop app that works with Scrivener, which I know so many writers use, which is really fantastic, where you can make edits in Scrivener and they show up in the Scrivener file itself. We also have an integration specifically for Microsoft Word that just plugs right into Word, so it's part of your Word toolbar. We also have an integration for Google Chrome, for Safari, for Firefox. So if you're writing on Facebook, or if you're writing on WordPress, or if you're writing in Wattpad or anything like that, it plugs in right to where you're writing, Google Docs, so that you can see the suggestions right in there.
We got a request in the chat for showing how to use Scrivener. In the interest of time, is there a tutorial or something?
Yep. Let me grab a document. We have a document, Kim, on how to use that, and I'll paste it in the chat so that you can see.
That way everyone can benefit from it and can check it out if you're using Scrivener. Awesome. We have a couple of other questions. There's one about, is there a free trial offered? And
yes, there.
So how does that work with the deals that we've got in place?
Yeah. Totally. So our free trial is 7 days, but that being said, this discount ends in the next, I think it ends on July 1st. So there's only a couple more days for that. So you can like either try it really quickly and then make sure you upgrade before July 1st, or we do also offer a 14-day refund period. So if you decide to just take advantage of the purchase and then you decide it's not for you, you can just write into our support and we can refund you. I'm putting in the chat the Scrivener video.
I'm assuming also we got a couple of other questions, things like integration for Dabble, Google Docs. Are there similar places where they can go for tutorials on those things?
Yes. So the best places to check out are YouTube. So if you just go to YouTube, ProWritingAid, search on YouTube, or our blog, prowritingaid.com/blog, we have a whole category that's called How to Use ProWritingAid, and it has articles on all of our integrations. So yes, we have all of those. I don't think we have a Dabble one currently. I'm not actually familiar with Dabble, but we do have Google Docs.
And these integrations are all included as part of the
exactly. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome sauce. All right, let's see here. We also have a question about we have, sorry, I'm like looking. Does PWA or does ProWritingAid tell us the ideal readability? Like, or is that you have to go elsewhere to find that information?
Nope, it'll tell you for your genre. So you'll have these, again, these little bars here shift depending on your document type. So you'll see it's a range for almost all of them. So you'll see, and sometimes that range is really small and sometimes that range is a little bigger. But as you switch your document type, the readability will shift, and your goal is to kind of get that little tick mark within the range of your particular genre.
Ooh, a question from Samantha. I'm so glad she asked this. How does ProWritingAid deal with things that are stylistic, like sentence fragments and stuff like that?
Great question. I think it'll really depend on what the suggestion is, because there's so many different stylistic things that you can do. It might flag it and then you could just ignore it. I think that's the easiest way, is to just be like, I chose to have this here. I'm going to ignore it. So I think for it, whether it's fragments or whether it is, again, another stylistic choice that you're making, if it's flagged, you can just ignore or disable the rule for that in particular. And then it's there. It's fine. Unfortunately, we can't always tell what's like a conscious stylistic choice versus, what is just incorrect.
So you
yeah, exactly.
AI that just plugs into someone's brain. I want to add something, because last year I did this fun experiment, and I want to encourage folks, like, if you're testing out this software, if you decide to get it or do the trial and you're testing it out, do this experiment. Choose a piece of writing that is from some classic, preferably something old. I chose Shakespeare sonnets, and plug it into ProWritingAid. What totally blew my mind was that when I put it into ProWritingAid, I think I put in one of my favorite sonnets. It's like sonnet number 90. And it like picked up the thing, like it only picked up 2 or 3 things. And this is a Shakespeare sonnet, which has got sentence fragments, and it's got like things that are broken up in weird ways and sentences that are flipped around, but it only flagged a handful of things, which tells me that it can tell the difference to some extent between whether something is actually a problem versus whether something is, stylistic. So obviously it's not going to be perfect because it can't read people's minds, but if you want to get a sense for like, how well does this thing work, plug in published, like a piece of a published work, and see how it handles broken up sentences or fragments and things like that. And that'll give you a sense for how it'll handle your work as well.
Yeah, and the other thing I just want to add to that too is like, plug in Shakespeare or whatever you choose, and also see that there are things that pull up. Like, the goal here is never to get to 0. I don't think any writing will ever get to 0, and we're not trying to tell you to get to 0 mistakes or 0 flags. Again, it's to give you information about your writing and make sure that whatever's there, you're doing on purpose, right? You're not just doing it because you haven't thought about it. You're getting that information, you're making the conscious choice, and then, you're not supposed to get to 0. No one will.
Let's see here. This question is from Robert. With all the many types of errors, can you recommend a process to change things? Like, what would you attack first?
Yeah,
I have an answer to that too. So, but you first.
That's a really great question. And for me, it depends on what I'm writing. So if I am writing an email, or if I am writing a blog post or something that's a little bit shorter, I typically have this real-time checker, which kind of checks in real time as you write, on all the time, because I want to make sure that my emails, it catches errors before my email goes out, etc. So I have it on all the time. That being said, if I am working on fiction, I do not want it on, because I can't handle it. I can't handle all that information when I'm also trying to get longer ideas out. So when I'm writing fiction, I turn it all off. And then when I'm coming to an editing point, so either at the end of my editing session or that week, whenever I'm approaching editing, again, a longer piece, at that point, I will turn on my real-time checker first. The real-time checker prioritizes goals. So I'll come in here, I'll look at kind of the big main categories for that particular document type, and I'll see where I'm outside of particular errors. So I'll see, okay, my sentences are a little long. I'm actually good with passive voice. My pacing's a little off. My sticky sentences are a little off, etc. So I'll kind of come in here and I'll see where I am off. I think if you do this enough, you'll start to understand where your challenging areas are. So for instance, you can see that in this sample, all of the dialogue tag is really far off. So that tells me that dialogue is an area that I really need to focus on for this, because we're way outside the target ranges for each. So I'll kind of come in here, I'll see where I'm off, and then I'll prioritize based on kind of the categories of areas. That being said, I think as you use the software and start to learn more about yourself and your bad writing habits, you will also know where you go. So when I am writing fiction, I tend to repeat myself a lot. So I also will go into the reports pretty frequently outside of my process, because I know that that is a bad habit of mine. So one of the things is, like, if you come in, you use your real-time report, you start to see where you tend to have areas of improvements and areas where you're just doing fine. Then you can kind of customize it from there. But again, different document types might have different options. I have it turned on emails, I have it turned off when I'm writing fiction, and then turn it on later. So it is very customizable in that way.
I'll also add, for folks who are familiar with the DIYMFA revision pyramid, this is the tippy top of the revision pyramid. So by the time you get to plugging in, for your fiction at least, to using ProWritingAid, you should have already done at least a few passes on voice and narration, should have done some passes for your characters, protagonists, a few of your supporting cast, story structure, individual scenes and how those scenes are working together. Once all of that is in place, then you run ProWritingAid. Chances are you'll fix a lot of these things on one of those passes anyway, because we're all smart cookies here. We can often spot some of these issues as we're going through, but we don't want to stop in the middle of, the throes of creativity in order to, hit the brakes on our writing. That said, like Hayley said, this is all about flagging what you're doing. It's just like with DIYMFA when we talk about the character compass or any of those diagnostic tools. It's about showing you what you're doing objectively, so you can then make subjective choices on how you want to handle those things going forward. It's not about errors or right or wrong. It's about making the artistic choice that's right for you.
Totally. And I think I also will add to that you probably want to do all of the writing, all of the edits you just talked to, so that you're not wasting time spending a lot of time copy editing or line editing a piece that you're just going to cut anyway, because you've decided it's not effective. Yeah.
Chapter 3 might end up on the cutting room floor. Why?
Exactly.
Through and revise the whole thing.
Exactly.
So we got a couple of questions that were about, we did get one question about using iPad versus Mac. It's cross-compatible. I figured it was, but just wanted to double check with you. And obviously, if you go into YouTube, they can look up sort of the technical follow. So the ProWritingAid on YouTube. Just
Google our ProWritingAid. It shows up there. Yeah, we don't actually have an app right now for like iPad or iPhone, but you can access the web editor. So you can just go to ProWritingAid.com and use it there.
So we did get a couple of questions around the idea of the content. So like, if we're applying ProWritingAid to our book, and let's say I'm writing it in Scrivener, does this mean that like somehow a hacker could get into my Scrivener account through the ProWritingAid something, or like how exposed would our writing be? And also like, how do we protect our writing from like, if it crashes, right? Like if we put it in the cloud or something, and then something crashes. So like, can you explain to us how you keep our writing secure?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I think one of the most important things is that we take privacy incredibly seriously. I think that's also a differentiator from Grammarly. I don't even know if I can legally say that, but I do. Like we are very careful with your writing, and nobody has access to it. It is like it's not. I think other software sometimes allows like marketing materials to use your writing and access in their terms of service. We do not allow any of that. So nobody gets access to your writing except for you. And so I think just keep an eye on that if you're using any software, because it can be that can happen if you're signing up for particular terms of use. So we don't collect like any information about what you're writing besides kind of where you are, and if we ever need to help you log in, we will always ask for permission and that type of thing. So there's no like nobody has access to your writing basically besides you. In terms of saving and stuff like that, we do have an auto save feature in our web editor. So you just save it the first time, and then after that, it auto saves every few minutes, so that you are able to keep the kind of most up-to-date changes. If you're using an integration in Word or Google Docs or something like that, it'll just save the same way, Word or Google Docs does. So it'll save based on kind of what the algorithm for that particular program is. And then we can always, if you've lost a document or something like that has happened, we can, you can ask our support team to try to see if they can find like a copy of it on our servers and that type of thing to try to recover it, if that is something that's happened. But it's very, very rare. I've been working here for 3 years and I've seen that happen like twice. And it's very rare that happens.
Just to clarify, so we could be writing in kind of like the way we would write in a Google Doc where we're writing in the web editor, but we could also be writing in a Google Doc.
Yes, exactly.
Layering ProWritingAid on top of it, or we could be layering on top of Word, Microsoft
Word, exactly,
or Scrivener or something like that. So
exactly,
it helps to give folks a sense for how the different ways that you can use ProWritingAid, and also how you guys. I know for me, like that is so important with making sure that our content is safe.
Yeah, totally.
And then we have here, someone's asking, what are the authentication options used and what security features that protect access? I don't know anything about those types.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just, I'm not 100% sure what you mean too, but everything's password protected. I guess, I don't know the specifics on like what the 6-bit encryption, I'm not sure. It's whatever the the standard is, but it's all password protected for all of the apps and all that type of stuff.
And in terms of licenses, can you have multiple users, like a multiple user license?
Yes. So yes and no. So you can have, if you decide to do like a team for your office or something like that, you can have, multiple users on the same like team license. But if you have one license, you can one license for you, Marta, you can use it on multiple computers. So like Marta, your license travels with you to all of your computers specifically, but then you could also do teams if you'd like.
So circling back to a couple last questions that we had on different elements, more like the stuff from the webinar. So how do you suggest we go through, like, I think this is we've sort of talked about it already. Should we break down like readability first, sticky, grammar? How do each of these categories, like, do we divide and conquer with the categories? Yep. I think we kind of covered it, but
Yeah, I would just say, I would recommend when you're ready, at whatever part in your process, run the real-time checker. It breaks down all of those goals and it gives you a snapshot of all of those different things you just talked about. So you don't have to sit there and individually run the style report or the grammar report if you're in the green zone for that. So if you're in, I might not worry about readability because I am in the good readability section here, but I'm outside of sticky here, so I might go to that. So I think the best and first thing is to run real time, see where you're outside, and then prioritize from there. I don't think that there is one particular way to go about all of it, because it will depend again on where you're out of the range, right? I would say that similarly to kind of the pyramid, you probably want to make your big revisions first. So if you're going to change whole sentences, and that's something that the report tells you, like, oh, I need to do sticky, for instance, because where you're going to be, again, editing an entire sentence, then maybe you want to do that before you do grammar, because your sentence will, change before the grammar, and then the grammar will change because of that. So you can kind of think about that as like, okay, let me see where I have issues. Once I know where I have issues, I'll start with the biggest changes and then narrow down at that point.
Awesome. So one last question about the editing side of things. Does it also pick up verb tense when we misuse the verb tense?
No, it doesn't always pick up verb tense because it's just really hard with context, because within it's like, a character might be talking about the past tense. It's just like tense is really hard to set. And even if you were like, okay, my book is in the present tense, likely there are sections within the book where someone's talking in future or past or etc. So there isn't like a specific tense report like that. But there will be places where you can do like subject verb agreement and that type of thing, but there's not a particular tense consistency. But that being said, that is something we are requested a lot. So our language team is looking into it, but it is really complicated.
I could see why, because it's a multi-layered element.
Yes. Yep.
So we have a question about the lifetime deal, and I was thinking maybe it might be helpful to just drop that link in the chat.
Oh, yeah.
And then we can also just let folks know. So this is a lifetime deal. You pay now, you've got this for life. It's 50
all upgrades. Yep.
And they get all the upgrades, everything,
yep.
And whatever workshops you guys run, it's all part of that whole thing.
Yep. Yeah, all upgrades, all integrations, all that stuff is all included with the lifetime offer.
This is like, I am super excited about this. I don't get super salesy about stuff, but like, this is mind blowing. ProWritingAid never does this much of a discount, but I went pretty pleased with pepperoni.
Yes, she did.
I really did. And I was like, oh my word, nerds, please offer this amazing discount. And they said, yes, it is not going to happen again, guys. This is it. Like, this is your chance. So even if you were part of the promo last year where we did the whole, we did a similar thing, but not as good of a deal last year as this is, still, you can get this deal. And I think like, who do they email? They email hello@ProWritingAid. If you have a previous existing plan, and they can sort you out so you can take advantage of the deal.
Exactly. Yeah. If you have an existing license, like a yearly license or something, and you want to upgrade, just email hello@ProWritingAid.com and say you came from the DIYMFA webinar, and we will sort you out with a custom price link that prorates the stuff, prorates everything.
So, like, seriously, guys, this is it. This is like your chance to get this deal. And I don't want to be pushy, but like, it's really exciting. And I'm seeing folks saying like, yes, I got the deal. I'm so excited. So last question that we've got, and we'll make this a last call. I know we went a bit over, so I want to be respectful of Hayley's time and everyone else's time. If you have any burning questions, now is the time. Otherwise, we're not going to be sticking around after this question. So the question we've got is, other than autosave with things like Google Docs or Word, etc., what are your backup options like in the cloud?
Yep.
I've got my own ideas, but I'd love to hear yours, Hayley.
Yeah, totally. So ProWritingAid is cloud-based. So like if your document is uploaded in our web editor, it's on that cloud, like it's on our web editor cloud. But if it's saved to your computer, then it would just be however you back up like your computer cloud documents or your Word cloud documents or your Google Docs. So those are all like, basically the only kind of variation from that is that if you're here in the web editor, which is saved into our cloud.
And I'm just adding a quick, I think we have a link for folks who are asking, like, how do we get the deal?
Yep.
There it is. And I wanted to also add my take, because I have been burned one too many times with losing things that are in the cloud. So here's what I do, and it is pretty much crazy town, but I have multiple flash drives. I have at least one external hard drive that backs up my entire computer every day. And then I go out and I go back and I like clear up space as it fills up. I also, with a lot of DIYMFA stuff, we do all of our work in Google Docs, but then I'll do backups locally. So this way, if we have like an apocalypse and my apartment gets completely trashed and the flash drives that I keep like basically on my person at all times also die, and my multiple computers, desktop, laptop, etc., then I'm basically screwed. Otherwise, there will be at least one copy somewhere in the world, in the cloud somewhere where I can use my work. But I cannot stress enough, like backing things up is super important. And like having the additional backup of like putting your work into ProWritingAid, like that is just yet another place in the cloud. So like if Google goes down and Google Docs dies and you can't use that, at least you've got it in ProWritingAid, and vice versa. Something, you know, heaven forbid something happens with ProWritingAid, if you've got it in Google Doc or in Dropbox or somewhere else, at least you have multiple copies. So I back things up at least in like triplicate, but often quintuplicate. Is that even a word? So with both hard copies and or like hard drive copies and cloud copies of things.
Got to put it in ProWritingAid and see if it flags as a word.
I know, right? One last quick question: is it only American English, or what if we have like?
No.
Hey.
Yes, it works with British, Canadian, and Australian as well too. Our team is actually British. I'm like one of the only Americans on the team.
The founder, right?
The founder. The founder's British. A lot of our team members are British, and a lot are just distributed around the world. So it works. You can set it to Canadian, Australian, British, American, whatever you prefer. US, I guess, would be the way to describe it. Yep.
Fantastic. Well, Hayley, thank you so much for sticking around, even though we went
way over
than I thought we'd be. Thank you all. I mean, I still see like a whole bunch of people in the webinar, even though we went way over and we've been doing Q&A forever. You guys are amazing. I love you, my word nerds. Mwah. Thank you for being here. Keep writing, keep being awesome. Thank you, Hayley.
Thank you all so much. We'll talk soon. Bye.